close, so let's get Shane, and then to close us out for the year will be Miss Dieter.
Yeah.
Sir?
No pressure. Our final thing.
Good morning and welcome to Can Talks, where insight equals inspiration. I'm Shane Landis, and today I'll be presenting to you Out Backwards, Ross Raisin's debut novel. Out Backwards tells the story of Sam Marsdyke, a misguided youth who lives on the Yorkshire moors, isolated from his peers. Now, he's not just isolated spatially, he's also isolated socially. When he's in one of the first chapters, he's in his school and he gets into some trouble with a girl because they go off to another room alone and start to do some things when a teacher walks in and believes that he's assaulting her, which he denies for the rest of the novel. But all of his friends and all the administration say he did, and so he's not allowed to go back to school. So now he's alone as a teenager on this farm with his parents who continue to neglect him. They don't beat him, they don't do anything like that, but they're his father's monosyllabic, and his mother is just not really there. So he spends most of his time wandering alone over these hills and watching these people from the city kind of pour out and pour back into the city, only taking what they need from his land, from his home. And so as the story progresses, he finally meets someone who moves in next to him. It's a girl, and so he befriends her. And so they start to go on these little adventures, these little outings. At one point in time, his father sells his favorite puppy, and so they go and actually rob a house to get the puppy back. Until one day, she decides to run away, and she wants him to come with. So they go, and they're running, and they're happy for a while. And they're just running over the hills, over the countryside. And after a couple days pass, she wants to go back. She decides to change her mind. But he doesn't. He wants to stay out, and he wants to keep running, so he doesn't let her leave. So in essence, he kidnaps her. And so the police are out, and they're looking for them, and they're trying to find them. And eventually they do, they capture them. And so then he's put in a mental institution for obviously kidnapping her. And so the story ends with him getting out of that and basically proving that he's not reformed in the way that he speaks and in his language and in his actions. So what has led him to become what he is? I would say that the main thing is going to be the isolation, and obviously geographically, in the setting of the story, it's very barren, or I wouldn't say barren, it's very open, it's very expansive. He can't cover all the distance that he needs to. He's really can't see any of the people with his family who don't really much care for him. And then there's also the social isolation, where he's labeled as this freak, as this violent kid, which he does prove to be violent later in the story. And then on top of that, what really leads him to become what he is the fact that he's animalistic. And so when he's in the constraints of society, when they allow him to go to the school, when he's with his parents, when he's not out free, when it's just him and her out alone past the constraints of society, he's pretty normal. I mean, he's pretty laid back. He follows the rules, but when he's out in nature, he begins to tend towards an animalistic side rather than a human side. So he really shows that at our core, we are more animalistic than necessarily what we want to think, which is that we're human, which is that we're civilized naturally. And so as he continues, or at one point in the story, early on, he actually brings the neighbors some mushrooms to eat, because they just grow wild around there, and they're supposed to be really delicious and edible and great. But the ones that he brings them, he doesn't check for maggots, so he brings them this basket full of mushrooms, which are all completely infested with maggots. So you get this beautiful image of the family sitting down and eating them, and him spying on them through the window as they all retch and throw up everywhere and curse him. And then he becomes friends with the daughter, because that's what you do to the kid when you're maggots. So back to the animal instincts. I really think that's the main theme of this story, is that his descent kind of into this insanity through his isolation, through his uncouth upbringing, really leads him to lose control of himself. And it's really evident when in the last scene when he's actually released from the mental hospital, he has a line where he talks about how he can see the devil smiling from his pocket. So it's kind of like the devil on your shoulder, and how he knows that this evil is still inside of him, how his urges can't be controlled, and how he doesn't really think, he just acts. I would compare this book to Clockwork Orange. It actually has a kind kind of dialect, which isn't quite as difficult to comprehend, but it is still really nice. And so I would say I wouldn't teach this book, not because it isn't a good book. It is a pretty good book. It has some nice twists and turns and very nice writing. I just feel like there are other books that do what it does better. So with Clockwork Orange, really is kind of the same idea of this, of seeing into the mind of someone who is insane, of someone who cannot change and tries to turn himself maybe, but can't. And the same thing with the dialect is that one was tricky, very funny to try and comprehend.
All right.